Hello, and welcome to the How to Make a Podcast podcast. My name is Casey Ruff from Boundless Body LLC, and I am the host of Boundless Body Radio. Before October of 2020, I was not a podcaster. Now, I have recorded hundreds of episodes featuring incredible guests, created tons of helpful content, and have consistently generated thousands of downloads every month since I began. I'm just a regular dude trying to share a message, and now I'm ready to show you my process, my successes and failures, and everything I've learned along the way to help you start your own podcast. Together, we'll explore the entire process of having a podcasting idea and take it all the way to publishing your first episode and explore all the steps in between. Then, I'll give you all the tools that you will need so you can record as many episodes that you want to release after that. Podcasting is one of the most enriching skills I've ever added to my life, and I've learned a ton by talking with some of my heroes and sharing it with anyone who wants to join us on our journey. So, sit back, grab a notebook, take some notes, and welcome to the How to Make a Podcast podcast. Hello, this is Casey Ruff. Welcome to episode 8 of the How to Make a Podcast podcast. So glad you have joined us so far through this journey. We have 3 more episodes to go. We're going to finish with 10, and so you are almost done. Today we will be talking about hosting. Before we dive into our content for the day, I have to tell you about a very interesting experience I had just today, just this morning before recording this episode. None of this was really planned out. I didn't plan on doing a podcast about podcasting. It's not something I've been thinking about or mulling around for a very long time. I think I mentioned in the intro, it's just I had this idea all at once because I got my information from so many scattered, options. It was difficult for me to put everything together all in one. And I had a really tough time finding anybody who had taken somebody through the entire process of putting out a podcast and did it in podcasting form. Well, today, as I was doing research on Buzzsprout, which is my hosting software, we'll be talking about them quite a bit today. I was doing my final research on Buzzsprout. I encountered a podcast that has been done 2 years ago called How to Start a Podcast. I stopped right in my tracks on my walk. I couldn't even believe it. And I started listening to some of these episodes. Travis, Alban, you guys did an amazing job putting this together. This is part of the reason why I knew somehow that this was, something I needed to do for my life calling, because if I would have encountered this podcast before creating this one, the one that I'm doing right now, there is no chance I would have done it, because they do such an amazing job taking you through step by step by step exactly what to do to start a podcast. It is incredible. They do an amazing job. They talk a lot of tech. They try to keep everything really simple and in a way that you can do podcasting for free. We've talked about a lot of equipment and editing software that I use that I have to pay for. They give some great ideas on how to hack that and get the cost down as low as possible, even for things like equipment. I've learned a ton about audio processing and things like that, things I didn't know before listening to them. It was also really interesting and very, very validating, because a lot of the things that they are talking about are things that we have talked about on this podcast. I did not plan it that way at all. And I'm going to play a clip from episode 1 of their show and see if it reminds you of episode 1 of our show when we said the very first thing you need to think about.
Before we get ahead of ourselves, before we get too far down the line, we need to start with understanding why. And that might sound kind of philosophical, like frou-frou, why are we talking about that? But it's actually really important to understand why you want to start a podcast. And that's because podcasting is a long game medium, which essentially means it takes time to really build momentum and become a successful show. And so if you don't have a good reason for why you're podcasting or why you're starting a podcast, you're going to feel like quitting before you even get started. So Alban,
yeah, so amazing. The very first thing that we talked about in episode 1 was finding your why. Why are you wanting to start a podcast? What are you hoping to gain out of it? It's exactly what they talked about in their episode 1. So funny. So I can't recommend that podcast enough. Go check them out. One thing that's a little bit different that we do that they do not do is they give you a lot of options But they kind of keep it open for you, so you can go shop around for those different options where I'm kind of taking you through my exact process if you want to do exactly what I want to do. But definitely go check out that podcast, download it. It's not something that's active from the looks of it. They haven't been on there for 2 years, but it's still very relevant. Lots of great information. They also have a printable checklist that I absolutely can't recommend enough. It takes you through all the different steps and gives you a really simple guide that you can check off literally. So we're going to link all of that in the notes. Buzzsprout has been an amazing host. They've been something that I vetted out in the beginning. I needed a host, or basically where your podcast lives, that was simple to use and would take care of a lot of different tasks for me. So that's why we'll be deep diving into that today, and we'll be focusing mostly on Buzzsprout. There are other hosting options out there, but Buzzsprout, it's super easy. And again, I was looking for the easiest way to put out content. So I can't recommend them enough. There is a cost associated if you are hosting a lot of content and if you're hosting it for a long time, but you can get the free version, which will host a certain amount of time for 90 days. I definitely recommend that. I mean, when you're starting a podcast, you really don't know how much work goes into it and what results you're going to get out of it. And if you, again, we've used this reference before, if you start a podcast with Shauna and you guys drink rosé at 3 p.m. and talk about your crazy cats, well, you might not get a lot of downloads from that. And so you might get discouraged if that's really what you're looking for. If you're looking for downloads and you're not getting them, you're probably going to quit. In fact, here are some of the stats. This is according to Amplify Media as of April 2021. Just over 1/3 or 36% of podcasts out there have less than 10 episodes. So if that just doesn't go to show, like, there's a lot of content out there and people start with these grand visions thinking they're going to be Joe Rogan, and that doesn't pan out always, obviously. And so a lot of people quit. And so by using the free version, you can at least host episodes there for 3 months, see if you like it, see if they're getting downloads, and then maybe you can decide, yes, this is great, I want to pay for this, I want to upgrade, or in fact, maybe you don't. When you do go past your certain limit of whatever level of Buzzsprout you choose, it will just charge you for every additional hour. So this is something we experience with Boundless Body Radio. I'm signed up for their highest content package because we release 3 at least 1 hour long episodes every single week. And so I'm doing 12 to 20 hours of content every single month. And we're backlogged with like 20 episodes that we haven't even released yet. We're scheduled out for a good 2 months from now. So I always max out my time and then pay an additional fee at the end of the month. For me, again, it's super worth it for all the reasons that we're going to be talking about today. But I definitely recommend starting with the free one. We talked a little bit about this in episode 3, all about software, but one of the great features about Buzzsprout is it gives you step-by-step directions, incredibly easy, and everything is linked to be able to get listed in directories. And that's super important because you want to be out there in as many different directories as you possibly can, especially starting with Apple. So more stats. This actually did come from Buzzsprout. I don't know how dated this is, but it does say that 50.8% of all top podcast apps. This does say the top podcast apps are Apple by far, which is 50.8%. I'm assuming that's all podcast, followed by Spotify, and then it just drops significantly after that. So those are 2 listings you really want to have if you want to get a lot of people listening to your show. But there's tons of different directories you can get listed on, and so I try to max out all of those. It takes a little bit of time when you're first getting started, but it's definitely a process worth doing. With Apple, just remember that you need several weeks to get approval. So they must be really backed up. It takes a lot longer. So just keep that in mind. If you were hoping to release tomorrow to Apple, that might not necessarily happen. But Buzzsprout makes it super easy to get listed on all of those. Just follow all the directions and max that out. To be able to do that, you also need to have 1 episode released already. So that's why we did the introduction to this podcast. That was before episode 1. I kind of told you the story of why we were doing this, the story of Boundless Body and Boundless Body Radio, the other podcasts we manage. And so, yeah, you really want to make sure your title, everything that you chose is correct, and that you've already released an introduction or a shorter episode or something before you get listed. So we left off the last episode talking mostly about the software Alitu, and we did all our editing through Alitu, and we pushed the audio from Alitu over to the host, which we told you we've already signed up with Buzzsprout. So that sent the episode over to Buzzsprout. So now we're going to talk about everything that happens once you are in Buzzsprout to get that episode released and out into the world. So the first thing that we do is we just kind of make sure the audio sounds good. We'll just kind of click around in the episode and just kind of check it to make sure everything is good to go. If you did a good enough job in Alitu, that should be very easy. The next line down will be the title of your episode. And so whatever you have landed on for the title, that will be there if you've uploaded it from Alitu. If you have directly imported audio from a different path, from a different folder, whatever, you'll have to add your title in there. And then you'll see the show notes or the episode description. So that's where you put all of the notes you see below most podcasts. That's where you put links, anything you talked about, any place that the guest wants you to find their episode on social media, website, whatever that looks like. This is where you're going to create that. All I do is copy my introduction and paste it right in there, and that's my starting point. I may decide to lengthen it or shorten it based on what we talked about in the episode, but generally speaking, I just start with that as the body of the show notes. You can decide, again, how much time and energy you want to spend with this. If your podcast has a different format and it's not necessarily one that you are, interviewing, maybe it's a solo podcast like this one, I just have a few notes that I just copy and paste in every single one. And then I'll have special links, or if there's something that we talked about, so I'll link up Buzzsprout and I'll link up Travis and Alban and their awesome work and their checklist and all that stuff. You'll see that in the show notes, but generally speaking, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. I don't know if people are reading through all the notes in particular, so I make it as easy as you can on yourself. Maybe it's just something that you and your co-host discussed if you're doing like a discussion style podcast. So make that easy on yourself. Definitely use the hyperlinks for sure. That's not something I've always used, and it made it so much easier to actually link websites, social media sites. I'll just go through and pretty much link everything. It's really simple for me to do some Google searches, or if somebody says, hey, I really want people to find me on Twitter, I'll go to their Twitter and go to their homepage, link that, and then every time their name is in the notes, I'll link all of them to Twitter. So that's part of what I do. Then below the main body of all the text, you'll see a line that we have on Boundless Body Radio that says find such and such at, and then we'll link to, again, their Twitter, social media, website. All of those will be linked to where they need to go. If they mention a book they have on Amazon, we'll link that. And then I'll always have one below that just says special love to. So this is anybody that we talked about, anything that they wanted to mention, somebody they wanted to mention. We'll just go ahead and link those people also. That gives you one more opportunity to send that person the episode and say that you link them. And generally speaking, you can have some good marketing from that. Maybe that person will be sharing the episode around as well because they're so excited that they got mentioned in a podcast. So those are things to be thinking about with your show notes. Next, you will want to add a summary. I don't spend a lot of time on this, and generally speaking, I might just copy the title of the episode itself and paste it in. Again, I don't spend a lot of time on that. Episode tags is another thing that you can add on Buzzsprout, which is pretty cool. I don't know if they do anything or not, but I'll always tag different topics. I'll tag the person's name. I'll tag the name of their books. I'll tag anything that we discussed, any related topics. Maybe it helps get the word out to people who are searching for related topics. Frankly, I don't know if they work or not, but I do it anyway. It doesn't take a lot of time. So that's the next thing to do. You can also assign an episode number at that point. So if this is, like us, episode 8, you can add that in there. All of that stuff gets automatically saved and uploaded and then gets pushed out to all the different directories, which is pretty cool. They take care of everything for you once you are listed in all those directories, which is another thing, again, that Buzzsprout just makes super, super easy. One last thing to mention before you are publishing your episode is you want to decide whether you want to use an individualized photo or if you want to use a photo that is highlighting your guest if you're doing an interview style. So for this podcast, the How to Make a podcast, we just use the same photo. It's just our logo. It's just me talking. I'm not going to put a picture of myself up here. So we just use our logo, and that is the picture that comes up every single time you listen to this episode. But on Boundless Body Radio, I want a picture of my guests. And so I will always reach out to them and ask if they have a preferred picture that they want to use. And then I can just copy and paste it right in. Again, Buzzsprout makes it really easy. If they don't have a preference, I would maybe go to the person's website. I wouldn't necessarily go to social media to snipe pictures from there. You never know if like somebody's kids are in the background or something. I've never tried that, but that doesn't seem like that would come out really well. So I'll always just ask if my guest has a preference on where they want the picture from, what they want the picture of, and they generally just send it right over. Once you have all of that updated, this is the time that I'm going to start working on visual sound bites. I may want to start teasing this out a few days earlier, a few weeks early, and Buzzsprout makes it so easy to make these visual sound bites look pretty on all the different social medias. And like we talked about earlier, they come in different sizes. And so one will be a size that's really nice for Facebook, for Instagram, for LinkedIn. It's the common like square size is really good. They also have one that's a little bit wider that fits with YouTube really well. And then they also have a tall one that works really well with Instagram stories. And so since I'm timestamping everything during my episode, I know exactly where the person is saying something that's blowing my mind. I want to capture this special moment in this episode with a clip that, again, looks great on social media. It's somewhere between 15 seconds and a minute long. And this allows you to create that. If you have time-stamped your episode, you know exactly where to go. And then it's just all about making your starting point and making your finish point really fit with that clip in a way that makes sense to you. I like to just have them kind of, fade in really simply and then fade out. In fact, here, I'll play you an example of one that we just released recently.
I think that I cannot do anything any better than, again, going back to Epictetus and right at the beginning of the Enchiridion, where he says, just remember throughout your life, some things are up to you and other things are not up to you. And a good life is made of focusing on the first and developing an attitude of acceptance and serenity toward the rest.
So that's it. That's a very short clip, about 20 seconds, of Professor Massimo Pigliucci, who is a Stoic philosopher, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. Go to Boundless Body Radio and listen to that episode. Dude is so smart and so kind, and there's so many cool principles that will definitely improve your life. I can't recommend that episode enough. But that was the soundbite. And so I created that on a Twitter square, because I know he's on Twitter. He's not on Instagram. So I'm on Instagram. So I created one for Twitter in the square that takes a few minutes to process. And then a little hack is once that's processed, delete it on Buzzsprout because it will already send you via email a copy that you can download on your email and go back in to create a visual soundbite. Don't change anything on the times because the time stamping will save. So all your work is done as far as creating the start and finish of that soundbite, and then just redo it as many times as you like, up to those 3 times to get 3 separate soundbites. They're shaped a little bit differently, but the soundbite is actually the same. And that way, not only can you promote your work on the platforms that you're on, you can also offer those different options for your guest so they can promote it in the way that makes the most sense to them or their teams. So I think those have been highly valuable. I do them for every episode. I think they're really fun to make and they're really fun to share if somebody is curious about the episode. You can just share them a little soundbite and they can decide whether they want to listen to the full episode. Now, kind of the last few things here with Buzzsprout, you can decide whether you want to publish your episode immediately, or if you want to schedule them out on a particular day. So what we do with Boundless Body Radio is we schedule them out again 3 days a week. And I know that I have episodes scheduled for 2 months out from right now. So if I just, take a cruise to Mexico and I don't have any interviews, I just know that they are going to release on the same cadence all the time, which is very, very nice. Same with this one. We're going to batch dump all of these episodes, these first 10 episodes on the How to Make a podcast, hopefully on podcasting day, and they're all just going to release all at once. So you can kind of binge through them if you like. You'll get all the steps you need to have a podcast and get it up and running. So that's kind of nice. Or you can also just publish it right away if you want to get it out and want to get it listened to as soon as possible. You can always just publish right away. We talked about this earlier. It's really nice to have a consistent release schedule, whatever that is. If it's always Mondays, if it's always every other Thursday, whatever makes the most sense for you, just try to be as consistent as possible with it. Other things that Buzzsprout gives you is lots of different options for processing, making your sound better. It's also where you can check your stats. You can see how well your podcast is being downloaded all over the world. It will show you what devices are downloading it. It will show you, where in the world people are listening. Always shocks me to see somebody across the globe listening to our podcast. So yeah, it makes it really nice. There's monetization options. There's way more options that we're going to go into today. The goal of this, as always, is to just show you my exact process and have you use that maybe as a starting point, and then you can decide what things you want to branch out into. Just to give you one more set of numbers, I thought this was really important just so you can kind of put this in perspective. If you are looking for downloads on your episode, I don't know how dated this is. I want to say this is sometime in 2000. I think this came from Buzzsprout as well. But just to give you an idea, total number of downloads in the last 30 days, which is a stat that they do really predominantly. It's really easy to find when you're looking at your stats. If you have 98 downloads in the last 30 days, you are in the top 50% of podcasts, okay? If you have 302, that puts you in the top 25% of podcasts. 982 in the last 30 days puts you in the top 10% of podcasts. 2,373 downloads puts you in the top 5% of podcasts, and getting closer to about 15,000 downloads in the last 30 days puts you in the top 1% of podcasts. So that will just give you a little bit of perspective of what to expect. Again, 98 downloads in the last 30 days puts you in the top 50% of podcasts. So at Boundless Body Radio, we have been working on it for over a year. We put out a lot of content. And so our downloads, we tend to average about 6,500 every single month. And so I figure that puts us somewhere between 5 and 1%. Our goal is to share good information with our clients and with anybody who thinks it's really useful. So my goal doesn't really relate to stats. I think it's cool to look at, but I don't get my heart set on them. That's not really why we're doing Boundless Body Radio. But I just wanted to put some perspective around that so you knew what to expect. So thank you for joining me on episode 8 of the How to Make a podcast. I really hope that was helpful, and huge shout outs to Buzzsprout for making all of this so easy. It is definitely worth paying a few bucks if you have dispensable income to take advantage of their features. They're really great. Their customer service is awesome. I can't recommend them enough. So we will talk to you soon in episode 9. Thank you for listening to the How to Make a podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review on Apple. Also, be sure to check out the show that made all of this possible, Boundless Body Radio, where we provide tons of helpful and informative content, feature incredible guests, and talk all about health and wellness. Cheers, and thank you for joining us on the How to Make a podcast.